All right, welcome. Thank you all for joining. I'm very pleased to see the number of people we've got joining in. Some familiar faces and some people that I haven't met before, so welcome all. This is our first run at, sorry, I'm trying to get organized here at the same time. This is our first run at doing a training session for Wyoming Aries in a while. The ECs have talked and everybody kind of thought that was a good idea to get started to be able to do this on Zoom again. It's a good way for us to share stuff across the section. And because it was the first one, I picked a subject that I could speak to fairly easily through experience, but not necessarily not going to be a highly detailed technical discussion unless others bring stuff up and can talk to it. So portable HF is something I've been doing for quite some time. So I enjoy doing it. I've done some NVIS. We'll get into that a little bit, but it's going to be a lot more of a practical, this is what I've done, this is what other people have done, this is what works, this is what doesn't necessarily work. Happy to have interaction. The way I'm planning to make this work tonight, I've allotted an hour. We'll try to keep close to that. And then after the session, or after we're done with that, if anybody wants to stay around and chat, I'll keep the Zoom session open as long as anybody wants to stick around. You're welcome to. If you got a question, by all means, jump in. If it's something that is a little bit off topic, or I want to try to maximize our time. So there may be I may put your question off till the end, something like that, but jump in if you got something to add. So portable HF and NVIS. The biggest thing I'm gonna not harp. Anybody who's heard me talk before, you're gonna hear this again and again and again from me. You gotta practice. You gotta practice. You gotta practice. You gotta practice. Mike KE5VAI had a great experience last year when we did the Ghost Towns on the Air. He came out to our ghost town and set his stuff up, and all the little gremlins pop up. If you don't do this on a regular basis, I mean, not saying that you have to do it once a week, but if you own everything you need to go out and work HF portable, and that's all in a box, and you have the concept of putting everything together, you just don't necessarily know the gremlins that are going to bite you until you've done it some. So you need to practice. You got to try it out. You got to run it every once in a while. When you get a little bit of a hang, you get a hang at it, you get a system together, it's kind of like riding a bike. You can work with it quite a bit easier. I have a system that I've used for several years now. I don't know exactly, a 7100. I've changed antennas now and again, and I'm terrible at keeping it cleaned up and organized, and every time I take it out and it just works. I recently got a different radio, a 705, and I've started trying that out, and the gremlins are still there. I just haven't gotten that figured out yet. It's a very similar radio. It works most of the time, but there's still a few things. So, knowing your gear and putting it to use is really important. And going on that point, another concept that we came up with, the ECs and group, we came up with the idea of trying to put together what we're calling NVIS Day. And that may sound familiar to some of you, especially if you're from the state of Ohio, because we've blatantly stolen this idea from the state of Ohio, Aries. They've had, for several years now, they have a day where a bunch of people, they try to get as many people out and using NVIS antennas. It's just a good excuse or a good reason for people to go out and try communicating across the section. Obviously, our section's got a little bit wider footprint than theirs does, a little bit more terrain than theirs does, but I think it's an interesting idea. So we're going to propose doing NVIS Day on May 17th. We don't have any details yet. We're trying to gather some ideas. I've got a contact in with Ohio to try not to reinvent the wheel. We'll take some of their best practices and go with that. So keep your eyes out, your ears open. We are going to try to do something, and like I say, get as many people. Hopefully, people will get together, and try different things. This is a good time to try and see what antennas work, what don't. Maybe we can get some fixed stations to be on the air and kind of use them as anchor stations, so you can contact them and get, some true readings of your signal strength, things like that. So May 17th, mark your calendars, and hopefully we'll have some more information soon. So you need to practice. 3 things that I use on a regular basis, and I none of these are emergency communications, but all of them are good training tools for emergency communications in different ways. Parks on the air, local nets, and contests. All 3 of them have great value to them. None of them are emergency communications. If you can say, give your call sign, say 599, and give your county name for a contest, 140 times per hour, that is not emergency communications. However, it is a good training tool, because you're going to hear things better. You're going to be able to read. You're going to get better at phonetics. You're going to get better at when there's a lot of noise, a lot of clutter on the air. It's going to help you communicate better, listen better, especially. Local nets. All of these are just ways where it's frustrating, frustrating or just kind of boring, honestly, if you go out and set up your antenna and your radio and you dial around and there's just nobody on the bands. So all 3 of these are ways for you to get on the air at a time when there's someone else there that's going to answer you or hear you, or there's somebody that you can chase, things like that. So parks on the air, whether or not you're activating or if you are chasing. Parks on the Air has a great website where you can see who's on, who's on sideband, who's on CW, who's on FT8, PSK, whatever, and then you can chase around and look for them. So it's a really good way to get activity. So you're not just setting your gear up and then just kind of hopelessly kind of wandering around looking for someone. And then speaking of practice, the best suggestion I have is front yard portable is a great way to start. Before the first time I went out and worked portable, I worked in my yard, in my driveway, multiple times just to get rid of those bugs. It's so much easier to fix that problem when you're 50 feet from your shack rather than when you're on a mountaintop 110 miles away and you forgot that one connector. Not that I've ever done that. But front yard portable, and if you don't have a front yard suitable to it, down the street park portable, whatever, wherever you can go to get a little bit of time, and just get your stuff in order and working and get a little bit of a practice, get a little bit of groove to what you're doing. It's a great way to do it. So, all right. So portable HF is pretty straightforward if you've done HF. If you've got an HF station at your home, it's similar equipment. It can be similar equipment. I really kind of, for myself, I break it down into 4 things. The radio system, I'll call it, the power system, feed line, and antenna system. Those are kind of the 4 as I'm packing my stuff up. I've kind of got those things grouped in that order. The radio system, the first suggestion I have is find a radio that you're not afraid to take outside with you. I mean, if you've got I'm have a tendency not to be kind on my equipment, and I've taken a brand new 7300 out to the park and didn't really bother me, and it's still running years later, and I didn't kill it. So other people tend to put their fancy gear up on the pedestal and keep it dusted and clean. Well, find an older radio. Find something that you don't mind taking out and kind of bouncing around a little bit. Suggestion: if you're brand new to HF, there's a price tag to get into HF. It's not the most inexpensive gear necessarily. So, if you don't want to go out and buy a brand new 705 or 7100 or 991, something like that, used gear, older gear is a great way to do it. You don't need a brand new radio to get on HF. The one suggestion I will make is that if you are brand new to HF and you don't have any experience with HF, there are a lot of inexpensive QRP radios, very, very low wattage radios, and they're fine radios. Doug just bought a QMX, which is a spectacular little radio you can literally fit it in your shirt pocket. It's a great radio. Doug has been around HF for years, understands the ins and outs. It's probably not ideal for a brand new HF operator to start with something like that. Start with something that, ideally start with something that you've got a local Elmer that can help you out with it in case you really get stuck on something. So, and when I say radio system, the other thing is so the radio itself and then whatever inputs you need. If you're going to be doing single sideband, it's easy. You need a microphone. Pretty straightforward. Maybe you get fancy, you get a headset instead of a microphone. CW, your key, your paddle, whatever you're going to do. If you're going to get into digital, it can be a little bit more complicated, and this is where it's really good to do front yard portable to test things out and find out what's working and what's not. If you're doing WinLink, you need that computer interface, whether or not it's just a USB connection or a Signal Link or DigiRig, something like that. If you're doing something like FT8, you need good timing, accurate timing as well. Not always, you're not always going to get, at least where I go portable, it's quite often that I go to places that do not have good cell coverage. So you're not going to get, you're not going to be able to use a hotspot to reset the time on your computer or anything like that. So just remember, whatever you need for an input. Again, single sideband is kind of easy. So if you're brand new, that's a good way to break into it as well. Power, I'm not going to do a lot on power because that's a whole class in itself. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can run it off your vehicle battery. You can run it off of, there's all sorts of different batteries. There's solar options, lithium ion, all sorts of stuff. And it is a whole nother chapter. The only suggestion I have is if you do run it off your vehicle battery, make sure you don't run it long enough. Make sure you still have a vehicle battery left when you're ready to use it as a vehicle. I've never done that, but I've thought about it. So feed line is one thing I just wanted to touch on real quick. Usually when you're portable, you're not a contest station. You're not a big station. You're usually doing a short run anyways. So having a really high quality, as far as low loss, is really not a huge problem. Sitting over here, I've got a chunk of RG58, which has got the cheapo molded ends. It's the cheapest piece of coax you can find, and I got it at a ham fest for $1.50. It's junk, but it works all the time. It's actually super reliable, and I don't worry about it because if it gets run over or something, I'm not out very much. Having better quality coax, I've got a nice piece of LMR 240 Ultraflex, which is great because it's very easy to manage and roll up, things like that. But but going something crazy like, getting some RG213 or LMR 400, which is really hard to work with, is just not real practical and not really necessary for portable. So, right. I'm gonna look here. I did put I put a few photos together to share, but my goal is not to do a death by PowerPoint session here. So the antenna system is really where things change for most. Everybody has a different variation here when it comes to antenna systems. And antenna systems, to me, when I'm going out portable, I'm looking at two different things. Physical constraints and communications needs is the way I put it. Physical constraints pretty much always is my first priority, or first thing I'm looking at. And what I'll give some suggestions here in a minute. And then communication needs, physical restraints, meaning, if you're on an asphalt parking lot, you can't drive tent stakes in the ground. Communications needs, if you're doing parks on the air and you're an activator, you really have no communications needs. They're going to find you. You can be the tiniest little pipsqueak station. People are going to find you and you're going to hear them. Let them do the heavy work. However, especially in emergency communications, you do have communications needs. Troy in Sheridan County needs to talk to Cheyenne. Well, if he's got a directional antenna and he's pointing it towards Montana, that's not going to be a huge help. So there are going to be times when you have, a specific need, whether you need to speak to a specific person or other things that could happen is say communications are doing well. You've got a good propagation that day, and it's a nighttime and you're trying to talk on 80 meters and there's this huge cell up on the South Dakota, North Dakota border, and it's just throwing lightning crashes like mad. Maybe if you've got an antenna that has a little bit of directionality, you point away from that just to get that, because you can get, even if you're hundreds of miles away, you can at times just get inundated with lightning crashes, things like that. So those I put under communications needs, but physical constraints are really what kind of drive my antenna selection typically. I'm going to share the screen now here. I'm a little bit slow. Okay, is that popping up? Somebody give me a thumbs up. All right, thank you. So again, these are just some photos just for some discussion points. It's not a huge, this is the Rover Mobile. I've put a ton of miles and a ton of contacts in with my El Camino here. I started out with, on the left is a dipole antenna with a set of military fiberglass poles. Works great. 7QP, that's somewhere on the Platte Goshen border on a section of state section of property, doing a grid line or a county line. And the other one is on a county line in eastern Kansas for the Kansas QSO party, and that's with a vertical antenna in the bed. I found that I don't have a lot of pictures of antennas because antennas are really difficult to photograph unless you got a very high resolution. So just a couple of examples there. Okay, so dipole, straightforward. This is what I started out with, and it works great. There are not a ton of disadvantages, but they're usually single band, so you got to take it up and put it up and down when you want to change bands. Not that hard. It's small, lightweight, it's cheap. You can make them yourselves easily. The big thing is you got to have a place to hang them. If you're in a place with a whole bunch of trees, guess what? Life just got easy. You got a string and a rock to throw over the branch, you're in good shape. But you also need space. Again, if you're going to be in a parking lot of a park or a shelter or something like that, you might not have space to be able to spread these things out, especially when you get into the lower bands that we're going to talk about in a bit. You're going to need some room. So in certain situations, they're great. But For me, I outgrew the dipole fairly quickly because I just ran into limitations. A shortened dipole, so something like, hang on, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that I don't, when I shared my screen, I lost my participant. Okay, shortened dipole, this is a buddy pole, which is a great, beautiful antenna. They are not inexpensive, but they're very well made. I've used one of these once. Takes up less room. They're typically a little bit more work. It's kind of an erector set to put these things together, but they really are beautifully made. They typically are going to be mass mounted. So it's not something you're going to throw up into a tree, something like that, but you can make them self-supporting, which is kind of nice. So that's they're fairly straightforward. They're compromised. They're not as, not necessarily as efficient as a full-size dipole, however. So vertical antennas. This is what I moved to next. This is a Wolf River coil. That's what you saw in the back of my El Camino. This has been my go-to antenna for doing parks on the air and contesting and stuff like that for quite a while now. It has very low footprint. It's a vertical. It has a small footprint that you may have to extend if you're going to put radials out. So if you're going to do it on the ground, you got to have some room for some radials, but that's quite often is not a big problem. You saw me in the back of my vehicle. I use the vehicle as a ground plane. Instead of running the radials out, just took the radials and clip them to, if you've got a car like my El Camino, which requires a tetanus shot before you get in, there's lots of exposed metal, so you don't have to worry about finding a place to ground it to. If you got a nice new vehicle, quite often, my Honda CRV, I will, if I'm using the other vertical that's there, is just a ham stick. Those are, again, very, very useful. Ham sticks are compact and easy to carry. I still use the vehicle as a ground, and I usually will clip some alligator clips and clip it to the ground side of the antenna, and then go to the exhaust tip and usually the lug nut, something that you're not going to affect the appearance on the vehicle. I don't have a lot of vehicles that are nice enough that I'm real concerned about them, but I know a lot of people do. So beams are not that common. Yagis, things like that in portable. They need to be on a mast of some sort. They've got some complexity, definitely. The L-limit size limits, you're pretty much going to be in the higher bands. I've definitely used a 6-meter beam in the field. I think I've used a 10-meter beam in the field, and I think maybe a 12. But you're doing some work if you're going to try to do a beam. And that's definitely not going to be, we'll discuss a little bit more later. It's definitely not going to be something real good for the NVIS short distance communications. And then the end-fed wire. This is kind of what I've gotten to lately. And end-fed wires are great. You can use them in a lot of different configurations. You can use them as a slope. You can use them as a vertical. You can bend them. You need something to support the other end. So if you got a tree or a mast or something like that, there's different styles of end feds, but they actually, both the vertical and the end feds, a lot of people will dismiss as NVIS antennas. We'll get into that a little bit more shortly, but I have had a bit of success with both. So, and the kind of the short thing that sorry, I lost my place for a second. Oh, the closer you are to a full-size antenna, typically the more effective it's going to be for you. That's what I've found. I am sure that is not hard and fast rule, but if you have the space to put a 40-meter dipole next to a shortened 40-meter dipole, the full-size dipole is just going to usually win out as far as effectiveness. So usually the more copper you can put in the air, the better off, or the more conductor you can put in the air, because not everything's going to be copper. I really try to strive for that when it's possible. Again, physical constraints is not just where you're at, it's the weather conditions you're at. Think about doing it. If you want to put together an 80-meter antenna in February at my house, wind is, you are not putting up a telescoping mast at that point in time. You can, but it isn't going to last but a few minutes. So think about, all the different constraints, physical constraints that you have to deal with. That's really going to drive your antenna selection a lot of the time. I know I'm kind of rattling through stuff. Any questions, comments through those points? Trying to watch the chat and everything else. So, okay. Let's go on to NVIS a little bit more. Oh, wait a minute. I missed one. I didn't have it on my other sheet. Loops. I recently got to use a small loop, magnetic loop, like the one shown. It's an interesting little antenna. They are not high power. You're not going to put 10, 15 watts into them typically. They're extremely narrow. If you're going to do something like FT8, where it's a single frequency, it's a good selection. If you were going to do something like a net, you're going to be in one place where you don't have to tune around, is not a bad antenna for that as well. But it's very, very, very narrow. So if you wanted to move around at all, you're gonna be retuning that thing consistently. But they are small and they're kind of neat, but not something I own any longer. So larger loops, I've never really dealt with them too much. I know there are some people that have used them portable. I just don't have enough experience to really speak to them. So, NVIS. Again, I'm giving you more of my practical experiences, and hopefully afterwards we can get some other experiences from other people. But really, there's kind of practically there's two types of propagation: ground wave and sky wave. You can get every debate you want on the internet if you want to go look for it, but I'm in agreement that there's ground wave and sky wave. Sky wave is basically you're bouncing off. Ground wave is 2 meters. It's going point to point. 6 meters, even 10 meters. It's kind of point to point. You're not bouncing your signals off the ionosphere. You're just kind of going from point A to point B directly. When you start talking about skywave propagation, which it's in the name for NVIS. Man, I hit the wrong thing. Sorry. Typically, as amateurs, we're trying to contact people all over the country, all over the world. That's the green line, the DX. You're highly oversimplified. You're taking your signal and you are launching it from point A, hitting the ionosphere, and then dropping it back down somewhere else, or maybe bouncing it multiple times, depending on the path. NVIS is the same concept, which just we're putting most of our energy straight up or nearly straight up and coming back down in a short hop. That's really all you're talking about. 0 to 400 miles is kind of what I've read mostly. I think that seems like a reasonable. And you can use the exact same antennas. There's not necessarily different antennas. It's quite often it's just changing how you have them configured. So, right. So I cannot get to oh, there we go. I got too many things going on here. I apologize. And I know there's a couple of you chatting in the chat box, and that's great. I hope if somebody's got something that I need to look at, give me a shout, because I can't watch that as well. There's just too many things on my screen. This is a typical antenna plot, and I just want to make sure everybody's seen this before. I know it's kind of basic, but this is an as-L depiction of the antenna model. So I'm hoping you can see my cursor. So when I'm pointing, I'm not just randomly talking. So the circle over here is your azimuth. So it's showing you basically where the pattern of radiation is off the antenna. This happens to be a directional antenna. You can see that most of the energy is going in one direction. And then this is an elevation plot. So you're looking from the side. So this antenna that we're looking at here, most of the energy is headed out in this one main lobe. You know, you've got a little bit of a lobe here, you got a little bit of power going up top, you even got a little bit going off the back side of the beam here, but it's very small. Most of the power is being directed in this one direction. So again, this is going back a page, okay, or going all the way back to the beginning. Again, I got too many things on my screen, I apologize. You know, that's where you're shooting real low off towards the horizon and trying to get real long distance with that particular antenna. But just wanted to kind of show everybody an as-el plot to make sure people have seen them before. So this is a sample. I'm not going to get into detailed plots, but this is a sample of the same antenna at different heights above ground. And it's just to show you what happens with a dipole. This is a dipole. And the thing I want to stress to you is that everything matters when it comes to an antenna pattern. Everything matters. Everything is going to affect it. It's nice that you can model an antenna and try to make a perfect example of what an antenna is going to look like. But when you put it in the field, the conductivity of the soil, how close your car is parked, you know, the time of day, the solar cycle, there's so many things. The chances that you're going to replicate exactly what was in your model is nearly impossible. So you really need to have a bit of an understanding of how these antennas transmit and how you can use those patterns to your benefit. You're not going to get an exact. So if you notice, this is and again, this is just a sample dipole. If you're only an eighth of a wavelength above ground, notice this is where you're going to have a nice NVIS pattern. A lot of that power is going up in the air. You get to a quarter wavelength, it's a little bit lower. 3/8 of a wavelength, you're starting to get a little bit of a lobe on either side. A half a wavelength, which is kind of the textbook height that you put a dipole. Now you've got these two nice lobes going off in either direction. 5/8 of the wavelength, all of a sudden you got this huge bubble in the middle again. The point here is that small changes in height is going to do quite a bit of changing in what happens with your pattern. Changes in what the ground is. Do we have different? If you lived in Iowa, is your ground going to be a little bit more consistent from place to place than if you were in Wyoming? I would suspect yes. If I go to Cheyenne and go to the city park, there's actually topsoil there. There's actually moisture in the ground there because they actually water it. If I'm at my house, there's about 12 inches of, I'll call dust, and then underneath that is decomposed granite the rest of the way. So my ground here is terrible. The one place that I camp up in the Snowies is a gravel quarry. That's horrible. There's no ground plane up there. So with a dipole at a low elevation makes for a really nice NVIS pattern. That's kind of the one consistent one that you can work with, and you know that's going to be fairly standard. But you can see that just small changes can really affect how an antenna works. So when people ask me kind of what's the ideal way to set up an antenna to be outportable, my answer, not to take light of their question, it's just whatever you can get in the air. Having the ability to adapt and be a little bit flexible, if you can raise or lower it, maybe you can change the ends, things like that. You really need to be able to, again, go out and practice it. That's how you're going to find out what works or what doesn't. So This is just a pattern I found for vertical. Is this a NVIS antenna? It's not a great NVIS antenna. There's no big bulb here in the middle. However, there is some actual, there is energy going up. Most of it's going out, but there is antenna or energy going up. An example that I'll use is a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, happened to be back east, and the Virginia QSO party was going on, and I did not take gear with me planning to do that. So all I had was my ham sticks and my mount for my Honda. No, I take that back. I had my Wolf River coil, so I had to be at a park. I had some place where I could spread out. So that was my physical constraints. I couldn't just go to a new county and just pull off on the side of the road because I couldn't set up an antenna in the field necessarily because I didn't know whose field it was. So I had to go to a park. The interesting thing in that contest was you are allowed to work stations from within Virginia. So I was using a true vertical. And there is a lot of, in that contest, there's a lot of communications on during the daytime on 40 meters. I don't believe I made any 80 meter contacts on that, but I actually made a couple dozen, I believe, contacts with mobile stations within Virginia. So they're obviously running vertical antennas. I'm running a vertical antenna. We're 200 miles apart at most. So, this worked as a NVIS antenna. Obviously, it's not ideal. The big home stations, which had, huge antennas, were hitting me with no problem. But when I started being able to work mobile stations who were actually traveling, I knew it was working NVIS to some degree. So don't discount just because vertical technically isn't a NVIS antenna. Doesn't mean that it won't work for what you need to do. Again, you just need to try it out and make sure that it will or it won't work. This is an example of a sloper. It was listed as, and I'm going to use this, as an end-fed random wire, end-fed half wave, anything like that. You're going to get some different. So the dotted line in the background is some form of a dipole as a compare and contrast. And you can see that the sloper definitely has some odd lobe to it. But again, you are getting radiation up into the air. So this really can work as a NVIS antenna. I just want people to realize that there are different ways to do it. And then this is back to another Yagi. This is another beam. A beam is A, not that practical to have out in the field, and B, really is very directional. They really work hard to get everything pointed in one direction. So you're really not going to get much of a direction going up in the air with those. So that's kind of my short spiel about it. I've got a little bit more to a few more things to give out or to show. Does anybody got any questions, any comments right offhand? So I think most people are going to use, and I've done a lot of research recently, most of your people doing NVIS antennas are going to be doing some sort of a horizontal. It's very typical. If you're going to do it where you're doing it at home, where you can set up and keep it set up for a while, it's a great way to do it. I did some tests with Chris up in Sheridan County a couple years ago. He wanted to make a 60 meter contact, and I have at home here, I have an off-center fed dipole that's up about 30 feet, and on 60 meters, it's a 6.8 to 1 SWR. So am I going to make any contact with anybody with that thing? Well, in actuality, I did. I actually could hear him fairly well, and he could hear me fairly well. I did put up a true 60 meter dipole at the same height near it, and it was certainly better. It was definitely, I could hear him better and he could hear me better, but it wasn't, it was not like it was out of the question that the off-center fed, which was not ideal. It worked. So it really is again, you gotta work at it. You gotta try things out and see what they're gonna do. So just a couple of things about building antennas, or just, especially portable antennas. Portable antennas don't have to last forever. You need more convenience. It's more about the packaging, so you can get that thing up and down. A couple of things. One, there's a lot of beautiful wire out there for making antennas. Silicon wire. If you're going to have an antenna that's going to be up for a long period of time, there are some armored, or I forget, they're armor clad. I don't remember all the names. They have some special names. I will tell you that my off-center fed dipole has been up for 11 years. I guarantee it's seen 100-mile-an-hour wind. Annually, it sees 70-mile-an-hour wind. I know that for a fact. I didn't build it myself, but it was a maker, kind of somebody I bought it from made it. They use THHN Home Depot wire. It's 14 gauge wire. Probably about 40% of the insulation is left on it. It has been down a couple of times, but just for short periods of time. The thing's 11 years old and has been beaten to death, and it works great. You don't have to have the top of the line crazy good wire to make a good wire antenna to hold up in the wind. So that's one. Another thing is wire. You don't have to buy gold-plated, super expensive wire either. And I don't think I brought it out with me. I found a spool of 18 gauge, I think it's green. It's this really hideous green on Dell City Wire. I bought 1,000 foot of 18 gauge wire for $16 delivered. It was on the closeout rack. Every antenna, if you see me out in the field, every antenna I own is this hideous green wire. But I had 1,000 feet of it for pennies. So you don't need to, again, if you're making portable antennas, you don't have to have top of line wire. I'm going to grab, sorry. I apologize, I had to go to my bag of tricks. This is my current end-fed random wire that I made. This here is some 22 gauge silicone wire that I got off of Amazon, really cheap stuff. It's 22 gauge. I haven't put it in really heavy wind. But currently I've got 86 feet on this, and I had it up for a week when I was at my parents' house in Tennessee recently. And 22 gauge, it's pretty small and pretty thin, and you would think it's fairly fragile, but I have been beating the snot out of it. I haven't, like I said, I haven't tested it to Wyoming wind yet, but it's surprising how durable it has been. So again, you don't have to get real crazy on your antenna or your wire selection. So the other thing that I have kind of standardized, other than on these my end fed, all of my Wolf River coil, things like that, I really have standard on a 3/8 24 thread mount. I've got all my stuff stashed here in the corner, so sorry, I'm going back and forth. So your normal, this is a ham stick. So that 3/8 24, it's a fine thread, 3/8 thread. Pretty much everything I have has that mount to it. It really is kind of handy to have that fairly standardized. So my Wolf River coil base, I can use the Wolf River coil on it. I have used the ham stick on that base before. The base that I have that I made for my car, I made a mount that goes into the trailer hitch on the car. I can put a ham stick on it if I'm in a hurry. It's just a one band thing. However, I can take my Wolf River coil, I can put the coil and the telescoping whip on it. So I can change out very easily. In all reality, if I wanted to make a really long sloper antenna or something like that, I could use a 3/8 bolt and thread into the end of that coil and just run wire off to a tree. You know, you can really adapt very easily. This is another homemade, this is, sorry, I'm trying to This here is a coax, an SO239 to 3/8 24 mount, and it's from the CB world. And it is the best quality one that I've found. I've bought some before of this style, like off of Amazon, and they were really, really kind of garbage because like the pin on the coax side was extra tight or extra loose, so it either wasn't making contact or once you threaded your coax into it, you never got your coax back. That was fun. These are a Tram 208, Tango Romeo Alpha Mike 208, and I get them on eBay, and you can get them for $11, $12. They're really pretty well, they're pretty affordable, and they're very high quality. I've got a handful of these. You drill a 1/2-inch hole into whatever and screw it on, and they really make a nice mount. So this is just a piece of angle that I got out of a scrap pile, and it has the SO239 on this end. You can put, so this is like for making a dipole out of 2 ham sticks. So you can put the driven on this side and the I don't know, reflector, I don't know if that's the correct name, on this side. You could do the same thing with wire. You know, you really could, you can do a lot with these. You can, it's very adaptable that way. And that's what I really would stress to people is just being able to have some flexibility. You don't have to go out and buy a top of the line anything necessarily. You can, and there's some beautiful antennas out there, but you can kind of, if you're into the maker thing, you can make some stuff fairly easily, but have some flexibility so that you can, when your physical constraints change or your communications requirements change, you have, you know, some ability to change your direction or your takeoff angle, something like that, and that really does help out. The last thing, and I'm really not going to go into this in depth, I just want to show it once. I'm going to share screen one more time. I would really suggest, if you get a chance, after I figure out how to share screen, VOA cap. If you have not used this before, it really is an interesting, a powerful tool. It's very interesting to see. It's a kind of a predictor for, I have to move so I can see everything. It's a good way to predict when you can make contact between point A and point B based on your antenna, your location, time of day, things like that. I use it quite often because our club gets contacts from people all over the world. They're like, hey, I want to work, you know, Wyoming, you know, I'm in Macedonia and I want to work Wyoming on 15 meters CW. Well, you come in here and you can do a few things and get a rough idea of when that might happen. I just kind of programmed it. It's a little bit coarse, so you can come up here, select, you know, your mode, do sideband, 100 watts. You can go to the antenna tab. So for here, I just made it as low of a dipole as possible. So you can change based on whatever antenna, whatever band you want. So I'm just going to say 80 meters. The lowest dipole you could have is 17 feet per this program. There's some ground planes, vertical dipoles. There's a lot of Yagi selections. So there's a lot of selections, but really there's not a ton of selections in all honesty. So I just made some NVIS type antennas. So dipole fairly low. And then I use the propagation wheel quite often. It really is kind of handy. So Troy, you and I want to talk. So this inner ring is your 80 meters, and it shows that you've got really good propagation starting, you know, 0-100 hours is not bad. So 6 p.m.-ish, going around to 1400 hours. So, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. 80 meters is probably going to work. And I don't use this as gospel. It's more of a guide. Looks like 60 meters has got a nice shoulder around sunrise and sunset. 40 meters is going to be more daytime. And then your NVIS drops off fairly quickly when you get into higher bands. And it's just a tool where you can take this thing and scroll it around. You can, you know, so if I move this over to Cody, things change a little bit. Let's do something different. Let's say I'll stretch it a little bit, go out a ways. So all of a sudden you see that, the NVIS is really not that exciting. You're now several hundred miles away, so it's too far away. I'm somewhere down in Louisiana. That's going to be too far away for NVIS, obviously. So, 17 meters in the middle of the day with that antenna is, which doesn't seem quite right. But this is a powerful tool to learn things. It's, again, you can kind of play around with it and see what might work, and gives you some ideas. It's just it's a fun tool to at least look at. And again, I wouldn't use it as gospel, but it has some interesting. It's an interesting learning tool, I will say. That is what I have. Again, I'm just trying to share practical experience that I've had. Again, I hope you weren't here for the math and theory lesson, because that's not my forte. I apologize. I should be a little bit more clear on my invitation next time. But has anybody got any questions, comments, things that have worked for them? We got a few more minutes. Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, hey, a couple of things. First of all, May 17th, I wonder how many people are going to be at Hamvention. Dayton. I know I will be. So maybe I'll try, and I'm going to bring my POTA rig with me, so maybe I'll make contact on the 17th. So
well, let me before you, because I haven't announced this anywhere else yet, and what I was kind of looking around was Memorial Day and Mother's Day. So I was trying to avoid those. So maybe we can, maybe we'll put a pin in it. We'll discuss it a little bit more. I don't want to get too early because we'll have a snowstorm, but stand by for stand by for dates on NVIS Day, but we are going to do it. Go ahead.
And another thing, just yesterday, I got a new FT891. That's going to be my new POTA radio. And I was setting it up initially, and I stumbled across on 10 meters a group of guys talking. It's called HF QSO. If you go to hfqso.com, it's just a bunch of guys who throw their call sign out, and there's no check-in. It's not a net. You just say, you throw your call sign out a couple times, and you say, who hears me? And people come back from all over. I was having a QSO with a guy down in New Zealand yesterday. The first QSO I had on this brand new radio. It was outstanding. But it's really cool. I've been listening to it, and if you ever want to check your gear out, no matter what you're running, they start about 1700 Zulu, about 1, I guess, in the afternoon, and they're usually on 10 meters and up. 10 meters? Yeah, about 10 meters and up, or 17 meters. Yeah. Well, they start at 17 and go higher frequencies from there, 17 meters. But they change every 45 minutes to an hour. They'll go up to another band. But it's really cool. It's not a contest. There's no formal check-ins. You're just seeing how you're getting out, and it's really neat to hear some of the people you hear out there. So it's just a tool. If you got a new setup or you're trying your NVIS antenna or whatever, heck, throw it out there. And as all you'll get is, hey, you're 5'9" in Colorado or 5'9" in Hawaii or whatever, and that's all you'll get. You won't get call signs. They don't log anything, so it's kind of fun. So it's a good platform for testing equipment.
And that's an interesting one. I'll look for that one. The big thing is that's why, like I say, POTA, nets, and contests are just a way to get, there's going to be somebody on the other end. And so that's a good one. Another one I forgot to mention, a lot of people use Whisper. So when you're doing digital modes, you can use Whisper to see where you're propagating to. The one thing I'll say is in Wyoming, if you're using Whisper on NVIS, there's just not a lot of stations that are reporting necessarily compared to if you were in Virginia. If you were in Virginia or Florida, there's so many more stations that are reporting. So it's a little bit harder, in the Mountain West to necessarily get that, but Whisper's another good one to try. Anybody else?
Yeah, just two comments that could probably be a topic for other tech nights is uh, first one, running a radiating wire or radiating material underneath your primary antenna. Does it have to be more than a meter, maybe 2 meters, whatever room you have? And then counterpoises. Counterpoises are these are all things that people don't think about, but they're very important.
Yeah, yep. And Buck, that reminds me, I watched somebody on YouTube, which I try not to go down the rabbit hole of watching YouTube ham radio stuff too often, but some guy in Texas ran a 80-meter wire 5 feet off the ground and put a radiating wire 6 inches off the ground and was making contacts with 5 watts. I mean, it really, NVIS is, if you're horizontal, is really, you can do a lot with them. So they're fairly forgiving if you're doing a horizontal that way. So, well, I appreciate everybody for joining in. I'm going to finish up the recording here. And like I said, anybody wants to stick around and chat, I am happy to stay on as long as you want. Swap stories, swap ideas, figure out when's a good time for NVIS Day. Thanks, Troy.